Hey, and welcome to episode 36 of Think Like a Hacker. We've got an awesome jam-packed episode of news for you today. We're chatting about an upcoming DEF CON trip that our team is doing. The WordPress Security team are debating backporting security releases to fewer versions, which is going to make things a bit more efficient for them. There's a really interesting project called WP Notify that Kathy spotted that we're going to dive into. Cloudflare has blocked 8chan after recent events, so we'll be covering that story along with a whole bunch of others. Get ready for an awesome episode. All right, Kathy, I am beginning to feel a little bit like Phoenix might feel. My studio is unbelievably hot today. It's kind of warm in Seattle, and it turns out one of my vents was covered, but I'll bet it still doesn't compare to what you're experiencing.
Yeah, it's a little like just we're baking cookies, except it's it's like an oven outside. It really is. And we had a record heat day today, so loads of fun.
Wow. All right. Well, cool. Okay, so diving in. So we've got a trip to DEF CON coming up. I don't know about you, Kathy. I'm really looking forward to that, huh?
Yeah, I mostly am looking forward to getting the whole team together. That's always so much fun.
Yeah, so every year the WordFence team makes a pilgrimage to DEF CON, which is one of the biggest hacking conferences in the world. It's kind of interesting because DEF CON is more grassroots. Black Hat and RSA are sort of more corporate driven with sponsors and corporate agendas and that kind of thing. DEF CON has managed to remain very grassroots and self-organizing. The ticket prices are really low. They try to make it accessible for everyone. I think it's about, last I checked it was $250, but my guess is they might have increased it this year. I don't have the latest data. But the DEF CON is more around hacker culture, sort of breaking research. It has some really cool things like the lockpicking village and so on. And I think I find it more of a culturally immersive experience. And then, of course, our team gets to hang out, and we have a whole bunch of events of our own. Kerry, my wife and co-founder, is very much involved in planning that along with some of the rest of our team. I think last year we did KISS mini golf, Kathy?
Yeah, I think that was a couple of years ago. And
okay.
Yeah, last year we went to the Mob Museum, which was kind of fun.
Oh yeah, right. And then the invariable see how many people you can pack into a limo contest, which seems to happen every year.
Got to do it every year.
So yeah, we're looking forward to that, and who knows, we might do a little bit of filming at DEF CON, not of DEF CON. We want to respect folks' privacy there, but perhaps of the team and cover some news and that kind of thing. So definitely looking forward to that. And speaking of news, let's dive into this week's news. So the WordPress Security team are discussing backporting security releases to fewer versions. And what that means is that right now, the policy of the WordPress Security team are, they're backporting to 3.7, right, Kathy?
Yeah, that's what it said. And that represents like 0.1% of all WordPress sites. So it's a pretty small sample size.
Yeah, right. And so WordPress 3.7 was released on October 2013. So they're backporting about 6 years of releases right now. And so when there's a security issue with WordPress, they don't just release a fix for the current version of WordPress, but they have a policy that determines how far back they'll release fixes. And so right now they're going all the way back to 3.7. So, even though we're on, is it 5.2 right now, the current release?
Yes, we're in 5.2,
okay.
5.2.2, I think.
Yeah, and then I think 5.3 is right around the corner. But they release security fixes for 5.2 and of course 5.3, which is upcoming as those are needed, and they'll backport to every single other version. And since 3.7, there's actually been some pretty big changes to WordPress, and so it's a lot of work for the security team. And if you think about it, there's kind of an opportunity cost in terms of they could either do that, or we could shorten that the number of releases that are supported, and they could use that energy elsewhere to better secure WordPress, to spend more energy on finding vulnerabilities and that kind of thing. So they're busy debating that, and I think it was 4.2 that received a fairly big refactor. So backporting to releases before 4.2 is a lot more work. Before the show, I looked at what other software ecosystems are doing, and Ubuntu has what they call an LTS, which is a long-term support release And for their LTS releases, the most recent LTS release has support for 10 years. This is based on Ubuntu 20.04's LTS policy. So that Linux variant will receive security updates for 10 years from its release date until they finally stop supporting that. PHP is actually super aggressive compared to Ubuntu, and that is supported for 2 years, and then they add an additional year for security updates. So a total of 3 years from when a PHP version is released until they stop making security updates for that version. And then, Drupal and Magento. Kathy, I think you're saying that there's some agencies that have developed LTS versions?
Yeah, that was listed in that WP Tavern article from Sarah Gooding on July 30th, that there are some agencies that have developed LTS versions for Drupal and Magento, but there's support fees associated with that to pay for the active development of older software. So there's sort of a financial price to pay in order to keep those older versions going.
Yeah. Interesting. So, from my perspective, 10 years feels really generous. And so if we implement that, the very latest that 3.7, WordPress 3.7 will stop receiving updates would be 2023. But again, the longer that we allow, the less time the security team has to spend on other things that might do a better job of securing us. The story was covered by Sarah Gooding in WP Tavern. So kudos to Sarah for bringing this to light, and we'll definitely include the link there in the show notes. But if you have a view on this, feel free to tweet at us or go over to Sarah's blog post and post a comment on that. Interesting debate, hey, Kathy?
Yeah, definitely is. I really do think that this will serve the WordPress community better to just focus on more recent releases.
Yeah, for sure. So this WP Notify project that Elaine proposed is kind of interesting, isn't it?
Yeah, it really is. I saw this, actually, David Bissett, who's one of the lead organizers down at in Miami, organizes WordCamp Miami and runs a number of meetups down there. He had posted this on Twitter, and I immediately looked at it because it really did look interesting. So this proposal, WP Notify, suggests adding a mechanism to send users feedback about state changes in the system. This is a departure from the notification system that core and plugins have been using that make notifications appear on the dashboard. And having cleaned some sites that did not receive a number of updates and therefore got hacked, I've seen some messy dashboards in my time. So this proposal definitely sounds like something that will solve those types of problems where the dashboard gets just messy with so many different administrative notices. So this goes beyond just doing that and provides an API to have a central place for notifications. So there's a number of interesting use cases that they propose, such as forwarding notifications to a webhook, for example, integrating into third-party services such as Slack, or providing a webhook to feed notifications from services such as GitHub into WordPress. So it sort of makes notifications of system state more extensible and beyond just that dashboard locked in. Was there anything about some of these proposals that looked interesting to you, Mark?
Yeah, well, the use cases really jumped out at me. I mean, I love the idea of having this kind of formalized rather than just being an API call right now where if I haven't actually used this API call for a while because I haven't coded a WordPress plugin for a while, shame on me. But the API call right now, I think, just puts a notification in the dashboard. And this is a complete API that you can hook into to create all sorts of different things. And so the idea that you can hook into that and get Slack notifications from your WordPress site or sites, you might have 100 sites and maybe you want to know about like super important events and you want those forwarded to a single Slack channel and kind of aggregated in that channel. This makes that possible. And then, coming back in the other direction, if you have GitHub notifications and so on, you can feed that into WordPress. I love that as well. Kathy, I know that you basically just said this, but I'm really, really excited about those.
Yeah.
And then, notifications in cPanel or Managed WP.
Sure.
So external software that manages WordPress or integrates with WordPress somehow. You can either feed notifications into WordPress or get notifications out of WordPress.
Yeah.
I think it makes all of that stuff possible, and then notifications on the desktop with Growl, for example, if you use OS X or OS 10, getting a Growl notification on your desktop when something on your WordPress site happens, and you can presumably filter based on the importance of the notification.
Wow.
Once you know about this proposal, you sort of begin to wonder why WordPress doesn't already have this, right?
Oh, sure. Yeah. I mean, talking to so many different agencies, and the feedback I've gotten from them of like how they work with WordPress or WordFence, and the different ways that they like try to streamline workflows so they are more effective and efficient. I see something like this really supporting people who are managing a large number of WordPress sites.
Yeah. I think it's going to be really interesting. So if you want to get involved, you can join the discussion on Slack. There's a feature-notifications channel on WordPress Slack. There's also a track ticket, which is 43484. So you can post your comments on there if you have something you want to contribute to the conversation. And then there's the blog post as well, which is on make.wordpress.org, and we'll put that in the show notes. So I think we'll probably let the team know about this, Kathy, because Central, that's kind of our way of aggregating security notifications into one place. And it seems like an obvious thing that we should look at, as this gets created, how does Central integrate with it? Is it worth integrating with it? And it just feels like there's some crossover there where, we can at least smoothly integrate it or maybe even add some value, right?
Yeah, definitely some opportunities that I think that we can definitely see what we can do for our customers. So it's very exciting.
Yeah, agreed. All right, so Cloudflare, getting into the more controversial area. So Cloudflare has revoked 8chan service. 8chan is, Kathy, I guess they were hosting content where people who are extremists and so on were chatting about the extreme things that they were going to do in terms of gun violence and that sort of thing, right?
Yeah, well, it's just kind of like a discussion forum, but each forum kind of attracts like-minded people, I suppose, and 8chan was definitely controversial. Yeah,
and I guess completely kind of a free-for-all, so not a particularly strict policy. And I think I don't actually visit 8chan, and I don't really know the history there very well, but from what I gather, it's the successor of 4chan, which is also a bit of a free-for-all. And 8chan's been using Cloudflare in front of the origin server, the web server that hosts 8chan, to protect themselves from DDoS, to mitigate DDoS attacks. And of course, being a controversial website, they are a prime target for DDoS attacks. And Cloudflare is, of course, very good at mitigating DDoS. And so I know via the InfoSec community that Cloudflare was taking a lot of heat for providing DDoS protection for such a controversial website. And so what they've done is, I think it was Matthew Prince, the CEO, that penned a blog post explaining that Cloudflare have finally decided to revoke 8chan, or to fire them as a customer, basically. So Cloudflare is not going to provide DDoS mitigation for 8chan anymore. So they are now out in the open with no DDoS mitigation, and presumably, unless they find DDoS mitigation of some sort, someone who's willing to provide that service, their site will get taken down on a fairly regular basis by distributed denial of service attacks. And so what's really interesting about this story, obviously I don't want to dive into the gun control debate, which is what sparked this change that really brought the conversation to light again. What's really interesting, I think, about the story is that it makes so Cloudflare are a service provider to hosting companies, and Cloudflare has presumably some sort of policy with regards to who they will support, and the hosting companies have their own policy. And so Cloudflare, by default, has to have a more permissive policy than the hosting providers. Otherwise, what happens is Cloudflare is inflicting their value system on hosting providers that are hosting websites that use Cloudflare. And so that was one of the complexities, and Matthew in the blog post mentions that very briefly, but I think it's really interesting. It makes clear the challenges when you're forced to be a content arbiter, and that you can't be more cautious than your customers who are providing a platform to their customers. And then the other thing that I think that's interesting here is that it forces Cloudflare to clearly articulate, now that they've taken the stand, they kind of have to clearly articulate what their policy actually is. And I think it's very easy to point at a single event and say, well, that was tragic, it was terrible, we definitely won't support that website for these specific reasons because of that event. But to generalize that as a policy, to actually articulate that as a general policy that catches every future 8chan that comes along is really, really challenging. You're gonna have to develop that policy and then wargame it with a bunch of scenarios, and you're not going to be able to predict all of the scenarios that are going to come along. And so that policy is probably going to have to be a living document that is constantly adapted and so on. And as you adapt it, you look at the other customers that you have or other folks that use your service and sort of figure out, well, how does that affect them, and how does it affect the hosting providers who you are inflicting your policy on. And so, I think Kathy and I on this don't, we're not going to take a political position one way or the other, but merely commenting on it as observers. I think it's a very interesting challenge for Cloudflare, and we'll see how it unfolds, Kathy?
Yep, I'm just going to watch.
Right?
Yep.
Yeah, so, all right. So yeah, the Facebook like button, I guess that's been a bit of a data free-for-all so far, and that looks like it looks to be changing.
It does. And we can thank an EU court for this. So an EU court determined on Monday, July 30th, that companies that embed Facebook like buttons on their website must seek their users' consent to transfer that personal data to the United States run social network in line with the data privacy laws. So GDPR is the privacy law that kind of put this into place. So if you're running a website in anywhere basically, and people in the EU are accessing that, and that information is then, obviously if you have a like button on a blog post, that is sending any information. If a user clicks on that sends, the IP address and any other kind of information back to Facebook. You are allowing Facebook to collect and aggregate that information on their servers. So therefore, you, by placing one of Facebook's functional buttons on your site, you're basically being a transmitter of data to the United States outside of the European Union, and the Europe's top court ruled this. So they are recognizing that sites that are doing this are transferring this. This stems from a case that was brought by a German consumer protection agency against an online clothing site called Fashion ID that was using the Facebook like button. And until now, embedding widgets and having them collect data and send them back to the origin has really kind of been a free-for-all. So this decision is basically going to go beyond Facebook. If any other social media button that's going to transmit user data back to a social network outside of that general EU location, then you're going to have to take responsibility for it. So perhaps the days of sharing what you like across the internet with Facebook is over. What do you think, Mark?
Well, I think so, and part of me hopes so. Between you and me and our listeners, I am intimately familiar with the widget business. We, of course, ran Feedit before we pivoted into WordFence, and Feedit was a live traffic feed that was a piece of JavaScript you could put on your website and see who's visiting your site. And very much like a like button or other kind of widgets that you put on a site, it executes, it loads JavaScript from our servers, it executes on that page, and it can send data back to the origin via a whole bunch of different means. And of course, the origin gets data for free when that widget is loaded, when an image is loaded from the server or the JavaScript is loaded and so on. And so, when we were running Feedit, we never really got into running some sort of data business or ad business. A lot of folks suggested that we did. And we actually got a lot of offers from people saying, hey, just put our pixel in your code and we'll pay you so much money. And we never did that because we realized that if we do that, we're handing these, the pixel owner, or, in some cases we got offers saying, put our JavaScript in your code. We're handing those folks the keys to the kingdom. If you put JavaScript from some external source on your website, you're allowing that that service owner to execute code within your site visitor's browser context, get access to unbelievable amounts of data, and then of course that data can get sent back to them. And so by putting a Facebook like button on your site, you might think it's a toy, it's just a like, it's a fun thing. People can click like to show that they love you and so on. But what you're really doing is creating this huge feed of data from every website that implements that back to Facebook. And of course, Facebook's business is advertising and targeting ads based on user data, including user browser history and that kind of thing. So if they can see what sites you visited, they can better target their ads. And so I think that what the European court has done here is very sensible and quite a soft touch, actually. I think that what they should do, and I'm not a regulation guy, to be honest. I'm a free market guy. I'm a business founder and owner, and I'm kind of like the idea of having a free market. But I think in certain areas there needs to be a clear understanding by regulators of what's actually happening, and in some cases regulation. And in this case, I think it's something that's just been overlooked for a long time. I think that they should take a look at JavaScript widgets that folks put on their site, see what data is being transferred, and then just regulate that appropriately. So I'm cool with this. How about you?
I am too. And I never really unpacked how that like button worked. Did it send data back because I was visiting the page and logged into Facebook, or was it sending data back when I clicked like? So I'm not sure exactly how invasive it was, but I do think it's good to have these types of things regulated, because otherwise it just kind of becomes that horrible slippery slope of all these different widgets everywhere sending data who knows where, and it just kind of takes away that the free transfer of being able to just visit whatever site you want to visit and learn whatever you want without everybody in the world knowing about it.
And monetizing your behavior, right?
Exactly. And selling it to who? I don't know.
Yeah, right. All right. Well, on that note, we finished on an anti-Facebook note. Yeah!
All for you.
Thank you. All right. I'll get off my soapbox. All right. That's it for this week's news. If you're watching on YouTube, please subscribe or leave us a comment or give us a like. If you're listening on Apple Podcasts, leave us a review. And are we airing an interview later this week, Kathy?
I believe so. I'm not sure which one, but it should be coming. Yeah, we'll schedule it up while we're at DEF CON.
Yeah, kudos to Max for actually making that happen, because I think he's going to be at DEF CON with us, right?
Yes, he is. So
yeah,
he'll
Max,
get it done.
What a legend. All right, so we'll have our interview later this week, courtesy of Max. So stay tuned for that. Have a spectacular week, everyone. Bye.